Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I'm Jill Korthaus, a social worker at an organization for undocumented migrants in Rotterdam, which some of you will also be visiting. I also recently graduated. I achieved my master's in governance of migration and diversity. So, in this video, I'd love to share some of my knowledge that I have on migration so that you also get a broader view on migration in the Netherlands and get more context before the migration day in Rotterdam starts. If you have any questions while watching this video, make sure to write them down and bring them along on the day itself. These questions you can ask to me directly or bring them to any of the speakers you'll meet, as each speaker is specialized in a different aspect of migration. Okay, so let's start with the more statistical part of the story. If we look at the residents from the Netherlands, we see that 72% is Dutch with Dutch parents. CBS definition counts your parents' birthplace and not your grandparents, which means that the third generation migrants disappears from these statistics. And why this matters and why I'm showing this is because migration isn't static. So what matters most is to keep in mind that even though this graph shows that 72% of the population is born to Dutch-born parents, other data sources show different and often higher percentages of people with a migration background. So depending on the definition used, the size of the migration population can look quite different. Now, let's zoom into the migrants and those with parents who have a migration background. What we see is that even though in the Netherlands there are over 200 nationalities being represented, some communities are more present in large numbers than others. After the Second World War, the first large group of migrants came from the former Dutch Indies, now known as Indonesia. Many of them were repatriates, people with Dutch citizenship or family ties to the Netherlands. Currently, people with roots in Indonesia make about 3.5% of everyone in the Netherlands with a migration background. So, a little later on in the 1960s, 1970s, the Netherlands had many guest workers from Turkey and Morocco arrive. They initially were invited here to work in the Dutch industries during a period of labor shortage. So, after the Second World War, a lot more work was needed to rebuild all the cities. So, although their stay was initially meant to be temporary, many settled and brought their families to the Netherlands. And this is one of the reasons why the largest migrant communities in the country are of Turkish and Moroccan background. So, around 7.7% are Turkish, while 6% is Moroccan. And around the same time, migration from Suriname also increased. When Suriname gained independence in 1975, around 45,000 people moved to the Netherlands, fearing political instability. This continued in the following years, and in total, 150,000 Surinamese settled in the Netherlands during that period. Today, people with Surinamese roots make about 6.1% of those with a migration background in the Netherlands. But interestingly, there are more Surinamese people living in the Netherlands than there are in Suriname itself. Lastly, another relatively big group is the migrants that come from Dutch Caribbean islands, such as Curacao, Aruba, and Bonaire. And this is migration that continues over time. These islands actually remain part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which means that their citizens can move freely between the islands and the mainland. Today, they represent around 3.7% of the population with a migration background. Now, together, these groups, Indonesian, Turkish, Moroccan, Surinamese, and the Caribbean communities, have played an essential role in shaping Dutch society. You can see and taste their influence in everyday life, especially in cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague. Indonesian restaurants, Turkish bakeries, Moroccan cafes, and Surinamese roti shops have become part of the Dutch society. I hope this short overview of the history of migration starting from the Second World War has given you more insight, and I really hope that you'd go try out these restaurants, cafes, because the food is delicious and you'd otherwise really be missing out. Okay, so now let's move on to the current group of migrants that enter the country. In 2022, Arjen Lubach, which is a famous presenter in the Netherlands, he made a diagram because a lot of people are saying that refugees are overflowing the Netherlands and that that's the group that is stealing all the houses. And obviously, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Yes, refugees are getting houses, and yes, that means that there are less houses for Dutch people to live in, but it's not the only group that is taking up the houses in the Netherlands. So I'm going to show you this graph and kind of explain what he explained in the video, showing you that there's a big group of migrants coming, and it's definitely not only the refugees. Okay, so this is the graph, and each block represents 1,000 people. In the graph, there are 400 blocks, meaning that around 400,000 people migrated to the Netherlands in 2022. As you can see, this group is quite diverse. So in the top right, the orange blocks stand for the Dutch citizens returning to the Netherlands. And in the top left, we've got the refugees. The light blue boxes are the refugees coming to the Netherlands applying for asylum, and the darker blue represent people that are coming through family reunification. So already that's a smaller group than the Dutch people coming back to the Netherlands. The green blocks represent students, so either from EU or non-EU countries, which is around 50-50. The yellow blocks are Ukrainian refugees that came that year. And another big group are the migrant workers. Now, the migrant workers come from EU countries, but also non-EU countries. And there are different types of migrant workers, for example, some that work in industries and others more in IT sectors. Interestingly, migrant workers from non-EU countries often get a different label. They're not migrant workers anymore, but they're called expats. And there's a higher social value seen in having expats here. However, if you really look at the migrant workers that come here, they are extremely needed. And people don't often realize that they're the backbone of the society. It would also be interesting for the groups visiting some of the organizations that work with EU migrants to also ask about this and to see how they experience working in the Netherlands. And just to give a broad and complete view on the people entering the country, as we've seen with the refugees, about half of the refugees are actually family members coming in later. The same goes for the migrant workers in the Netherlands, so 50% of the red blocks are actually family members. The smallest portion is people that migrate here for a relationship, indicated in the pink boxes, and on the bottom right there's the gray boxes, which include people that come here for voluntary work, medical care, cultural exchanges, or other unknown reasons. Okay, so I think we've covered a little bit about the history of the migration in the Netherlands, also a small part of who the migrants are entering the country, but what do the Dutch policies and politicians say about this? Migration in the Netherlands is a very sensitive topic right now, but I think that's the same in many of the other EU countries and in America and in Australia. So on one side, right-wing parties are known for dismissing migrants and a push for strict border control, reducing migration, especially for refugees, and often advocating for punitive measures. On the other side, we have left-wing parties that are generally more open, and they emphasize the economic benefits migrants bring and highlight the moral duty to help people fleeing danger. But these opposing views have led to heated debates in the Dutch politics. The Dutch cabinet has actually collapsed twice in recent years because of them. And in July 2023, the cabinet fell after coalition parties couldn't agree on new rules to limit refugee arrivals, particularly around family reunification. And then more recently, in June 2025, the cabinet fell again. And this time it happened because the coalition couldn't agree on proposed measures from Geert Wilders' party. And for those who don't know him, often people call him the Dutch Trump. Anyway, his measures aimed to not only criminalize undocumented people, but also social workers, psychologists, doctors, or even people handing out a cup of soup to undocumented people. So this sparked a huge national debate in the Netherlands because these measures would effectively criminalize the work of hundreds of professionals and volunteers. Eventually, the cabinet fell, but the law criminalizing undocumented migrants continued through Parliament. And now it is currently under review in the first chamber, where it could be revised or blocked. For a lot of undocumented people, this has a huge impact on their daily stress levels and the feeling of safety. And of course, for organizations working with these groups, there's also been quite a big scare. Now, I think it's very interesting to also ask people while you visit these organizations about this and how they experience it themselves, and to really take these stories back with you, back in your daily work, especially with the idea that a lot of EU countries and politicians are actually following a trend of more criminalization under undocumented migrants. So I think it is very good to really take your time, ask the questions to the people that you speak to, but also to the social workers working on that day, and see what you could do as a social worker back in your country.